right. Okay, recording TST meeting. What is today? April 18th?
Correct.
Thanks. So we have our usual start. David, let me pass it to you for a second.
Thanks. So for acknowledgements, I'm just reloading the wiki page real quick just to see. I don't see any written acknowledgements, but we should still open the floor to see if people want to give any verbal acknowledgements for great community work within the last week or two that they want to recognize people for. Does anybody want to give a shout out to anybody?
I think Ashok from Intel has been really doing great.
Oh, great.
He's been pushing system test QA, working with Suchitra. I'm not sure he's on the call, but he was just on the previous call with us. XCR's tested and
nice. So. Great. Well, thanks for recognizing.
Maybe could let me know.
Sure. No. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. It's one thing to say it, but if they're not here, for sure. Exactly. Okay. Well, thanks for that. Any other shout outs people want to give? Okay, and I didn't send a reminder this week, so apologies about that. But as a general reminder, there is now the acknowledgements page on the Cord Wiki. So just, if there's somebody like, Tom was mentioning that you're thinking of, it's good to capture that and write it down, because then, like Tom had pointed out, if we're not here, they can't see it. But if we put it on the page, it's easier for us to record and share out those sorts of recognition moments. So just keep that page in mind and add people to it throughout the week.
Thank you. So I know we have a pending collaborator proposal. I have offline solicited feedback from the TST and have not yet accumulated enough to pass quorum. So I unfortunately don't have any progress on that, and I was hoping we'd get Saurav on the call, but we do not have him, it looks like. As a general statement as to how, what we can do about being shorthanded on the TST and so on, I have sent an email to a couple of the TST members that have seemingly moved on and are not really active in Cord to see if they are, in fact, agreeable to stepping down. In which case we can resolve the issue. But I need to get some movement on that first. So we're still in a holding pattern, unfortunately. Bill, do you have anything to add to that?
So I missed the comment, Larry. I stepped out for a second.
We're talking about not being able to get quorum for voting on accelerants, or just in general not having quorum for voting on things.
I said I've sent email to a couple of the TST members that are no longer active, asking for them to officially say that they're stepping down, which I think I need to have happen before I can do anything else.
Right, and you have the ability to assign new TST members as well until August, when the voting will happen for the first time for Cord. So it's really up to you. And given that we haven't had quorum for 3 or 4 of these, it's probably a good idea to assign somebody to TST that you can count on to be here.
Well, so that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it in terms of adding people without having removed people. I guess I could go ahead and do that. I was trying to take the step of getting some resignations officially in hand first, but
there's no requirement for attendance or anything?
It doesn't really matter, Larry, because you have the right to choose the size of the TST. So when we get to the point of voting, it's up to you how many you want on. So if we have, if you don't get resignations from somebody now, it doesn't matter. You can cut back the number when we get to the point of voting.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. All right, then I'll make sure we're in good state by next time. Okay. So I wanted last time, and clearly there was a little email exchange this morning about it. There was a general discussion, and just to bring those that weren't on the call last week, there was a general discussion about what was going to happen with Cord and Volta. In the Cord case, of course, Shrikant is moving on, and we were just generally discuss, and we have a lot of people that are interested in stepping up. And so there was a general discussion about how we were going to kickstart Cord again. And similarly with Volta, the issue was that it wasn't clear. There was a basic general question of who's the product owner, so to speak, and not necessarily just purely who's checking in the most code, but who's making sure progress is made. And so, again, it would be good to have Saurav here, but Saurav and Bill and Jono and I spent a few minutes just talking about where things are. And I think my takeaway from the general discussion was, and I'm happy to open the floor for further discussion, was that while there was activity in individual trials that are going on, they were largely happening directly between a provider and a vendor under the title of Volta, but we weren't seeing that work coming back into the reference implementation necessarily. And it would be good to have Volta included in the reference implementation with hardware, end-to-end hardware that's running under Volta plugged into Cord. And that is from my point of view, the priority for what we need to figure out how to do. So I know, David, you raised the point, and I know you certainly have some involvement there. Do you want to comment on your view of the state of Volta?
Yeah, I didn't know there was general. I can't remember how you termed it in your email, much more elegantly than I will. But that there was a need for a reset or restart. I think as participating in these trials, I think as we find code changes, they will find their way back to the open source. At least I know my company is committed to that, and creating JIRAs for those and putting them back in the open source. So I'm a little befuddled why we wouldn't see changes required for different trials that may be added by various different vendors, finding their way back to the open source code. And that's kind of the point of open source. Now, there may be some time delay there, I suspect, for whatever reasons, but eventually I would think they'd all be back in the code base. I do believe there needs to be a product leader for Volta, kind of doing that, kind of be in charge of that direction. I think because there are multiple vendors involved, it would be beneficial to have representation from those multiple vendors on kind of that controlling board somehow, so that all different vendor points of view and needs are kind of met.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to get.
Yeah, because I fear if they're not, you're going to see some forks, and I think that's a dangerous thing.
Yeah, so this is. Go ahead. I'm guessing that was Donna. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, and we do, right? I mean, it's right now we're driven by a proof of concept that we all, we're driven by the AT&T efforts, and the timing of those efforts are causing some fracturing across the vendors and the timeliness of checking in code, or let's say duplication of code where there's multiple vendors are working on the same problem statement, right? So we have to figure out how do we mitigate that? How do we create some governance or some process around that to optimize our component team, right? Our cross vendor component team.
And this is Sean from AT&T. We do very much encourage the participant, from of the community to open Jira ticket if they found issues related to the owners of Voltas right away, and we even request the vendor community to provide updates on those Jira tickets. Sometimes we do need to evaluate whether the issues is maybe more AT&T infrastructure or environment specific. So the fix may not be applicable for everybody in the community. But however, I think in general, we definitely request the participant to report the ticket and provide the fix as soon as the issue has been resolved. So, and as long as the issue is not AT&T specific. So, yeah, I would love to see more contribution coming out from the experience we have within the last few months. So I am still pressing our participants to provide their to contribute the code, and then I wonder whether, you know, to state what Donna was saying is, you know, so once the ticket's opened, and who will be evaluate the code, or, you know, and see whether those codes can be merged. I think that is the part I'm not too certain about. Larry, is that clear?
Yeah, that's very good. That's very good. That's very helpful. Let me put one more thing on the table, which is, while I'm 100% supportive of everyone participating to see a trial through, there is another objective, which is
Right.
one that's been kind of dropped a little bit, which is, you know, code changes do effectively make it back in, but at some point it would be really, really good to have a distribution of both that was sort of end to end included in Cord in the reference implementation. And so while there could be 100% success on the trial side, I'm sort of speaking out for the, you know, included in the reference implementation side. And that's, and again, I think it's probably the same on both sides, which is it would be good to have someone that kept pushing that boulder up the hill and making sure progress was being made on behalf of the reference implementation.
Right, and that's the continuity, right? I mean, it's we do have the AT&T specific, right, or the acceleration of the Volta roadmap via the AT&T push, but I do experience some fracturing. And then how are we satisfying the May delivery of Cord, right, in Volta that is more market wide. It's adoptable from from the reference architecture, as opposed to what might be driven from the AT&T effort or unique to AT&T. So who owns that, right? Who's going to champion the or play that trump card? Or is it one person? Is it multiple vendors? That's the things that I've been asking for last week.
Well, you know, it's interesting because we have a similar situation, arguably, on the Cord side. It's not as butted up against trials, so that's a little bit different dynamic, but we've got multiple collaborators/vendors that are interested in contributing. And I'm not quite sure what the right formula is to get those contributions working in concert, as opposed to running in parallel. I mean, one model we use is that we have someone from Owen Lab kind of providing the glue. We don't at the moment have that person in Cord, and you know, I can't speak for where Ali's time is, but he certainly has other distractions now, and so we no longer have that person on the Volta side either. Not you know, just as kind of the cohesion to make sure that, at least from a reference implementation point of view, things are moving forward.
Right. I think I talked to Saurav, and I thought we were onboarding a new person this week at OnLab that would be slotted for Volta. I think if Saurav's on the call, he could probably speak to that. But yeah, it would be good to.
I can speak. This is Bill.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to the color of this conversation too. So, so the conversation that we were talking about last week was just trying to figure out where we sit with the ability to get different OLTs working with Volta. And as you kind of go across the spectrum of the 5 or 6 options, really there isn't one that is totally open source and working. we are taking responsibility to get a white box version of that working, the driver as well as the piece that sits on the OLT side. And there's a couple of vendors that are still positioning their box side piece as something that won't go open source, right? So that's not really an option for distribution into open source. We want to make sure that there is an open source option end to end, and that there are hardware devices that can be used for that. And there's probably going to be at least 3 that eventually become available. And you're right, we have a person that started this week. His name is Shad. He'll be working with Sohrab on making sure that we have that type of a solution.
Thank you.
And sorry, who was speaking?
It's Bill.
Bill.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I think what we agreed upon is that we, from there, we build the contribution community, the community around Saurav and the new head, so that we have, again, we need that continuity, that person like Ollie, where you're the checks and balances, I think, the governance, if you will, for the multiple vendors, and mitigating the duplication is going to be key, so that we can take on net new roadmap efforts.
Yeah,
right?
That's exactly right. And so Chad might be that person, maybe take a little bit of time to get up to speed. I mean, again, the way that I look at it is everyone has, their top of mind issue, and we need someone whose top of mind issue is, how do I get an open source end-to-end thing pulled together, taking the best of whatever is available.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good summary of the state, and it's still a work in progress on the Voltus side. On the Cord side, we had a call yesterday, pretty good attendance. We have at least 3, and now I've just discovered, based on an email, a 4th vendor that's interested in stepping up. And step 1 was just to get the current version of Cord up and running again, so that it can be included in configurations for the Dangerous Edition release. Shrikant had it really close, but there were some last details to work out. There's also the big issue of the relationship between Cord and other projects, both things like Panda that are on the analytics side, and ONAP, for which there needs to be integration, and there's likely to be overlap, and so we need to just understand that going forward. So again, no big answers, but there's now an Cord Slack channel, and I asked Luca to set up an email. There's a wiki page, and so there are various people stepping up to put together, I guess you could call them roadmaps of how we're going to make progress. Anyone want to add anything to that? Oh, and there's going to be a weekly meeting. So it's on the Cord calendar, Monday morning, 9:30, I believe it is, Pacific time. Just focused on the analytics at Cord.
Okay, good.
Back in case people want to join back for that
discussion. I didn't hear.
Couldn't hear that.
The Slack, I was just talking, that we have created a Slack for the analytics course. So, I guess discussions will start there, as well as, we're going to have an offsite meeting as well, starting today, on putting the overall requirements and we have another guy from Ixia who claims that he has the Cord up and running. So we're going to meet with him as well. So he wants to demo it in Austin, I think, this month.
We have an operator very interested in the capabilities of Cord today. As well, we'll be looking to implement that in our labs. So wherever we can assist. This is Donna with Radisys.
That's good. So
we're just
plug your people into the meeting, and that will help, the weekly meeting, so that will help.
That'd be great. Thank you. We will do that.
But I think one of the overriding things with Cord is, like I mentioned, the relationship to other projects. There's a lot going on in this space. We need to have a Cord story that borrows where possible and reinvents where necessary. And so, and B, following the model of, it's always good to have running code and then work from there, as opposed to plan forever. Okay. Anything else on those issues? So I had just a bit open-ended technical question discussion I wanted to have to see what kind of feedback we'd get. Everyone understands that the first early releases of Cord had certain R-Cord isms built into it. And I'm wondering what of those are actually part of the platform and what we should consider to be R-Cord specific. So the big one is that when you hit the VSG, you've got a doubly tagged packet, VXLAN tags coming in. Is that part of the platform, or is that R-Cord specific? Is it always going to be, for all we talk about arbitrary services and VNFs, it's always the case that you've got a LAN side network and you've got a WAN side network and you've got a transition point in the middle. Today it's implemented in a container. It could possibly be implemented by flow rules, like an ONOS app of some sort. So I might turn to start with Oz and just hear I know the doubly tagged packets is an issue for MCord.
It sure is, especially for the access side. But before I can actually answer whether the way R-Cord does this, give me some time to think about it.
Sure. Yeah, sorry for springing that one on you.
But as I told you before, for within MCord, what does take place, maybe I can tell you what happens, and then we can jointly decide whether the R-Cord solution applies here. For the access, there is a disaggregation of the access node in MCord, and the disaggregation is into two parts. One part is realized on OpenStack on a VM. The other part is on a special purpose hardware remotely. And between these two, and these two components are also programmable. So the VNF part has an ONOS agent embedded inside, which forwards the ONOS messages onto the remote unit. So for that purpose, on top of VXLAN, we create a VLAN between the VNF and the remote unit. So that specific VNF ends up getting doubly tagged. So does this, is this similar to what RCord does?
So if I could try to summarize what you said. So the RU, the remote unit, is at one end, and you talked about the VNF. Is the VNF the CU, or is it just an arbitrary VNF, a hypothetical VSG?
Oh, it's a CU.
It is the CU. So you are currently doubly tagged between the RU and the CU.
No, the RU only has a VLAN tag to it. Only the CU is doubly tagged with VXLAN and VLAN.
Oh, it's not until you get to the CU. So as you leave the CU, it's doubly tagged.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Well, you know what? There is a correspondence in the sense that I'm actually someone else might be able to speak to it more specifically, but it's a tag applied in the RU equivalent at home, and then there is a second tag applied at the OLT when you hit the central office. And if you thought of volt as equivalent to the CU, then there is an equivalence there.
Okay, if that is the case, maybe it's a good idea to come up with a unified solution if there are discrepancies between the two approaches, and keep that unified solution as part of the platform.
Right, and that's kind of where I was trying to take this, is while there are possible variations as you work from remote to the CU, remote to the central office, whether the remote is the RAN or the home, that by the time you enter the fab, let's say that you hit the first point within the central office, and in your case that would be, in the M-Cord case that would be the CU.
Yes.
Hey Larry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Right now between the RU and BBU, since the RU is not a VNS, so for the RU we use VLAN as outside, and so far we didn't use VSG service inside the XOS to bring up the VLAN. We just through VTN to push the VLAN tag between the RU and the BBU. So we just simplified no VSG service, but use the part of the VSG feature through VTN right now.
Okay. So arguably this stays access technology specific until you hit a certain point. I mean, that's ultimately, I think, what the answer is going to have. I'm going to guess the answer has to be. And where is the Cord platform begin? And I guess you could argue it begins when you leave Volt, which would say when you leave the Volt-controlled OLT device in the R-Cord case, and when you leave the CU in the M-Cord case. So let me turn to Mark if he's on. And is there anything about E-Cord that changes that?
Yeah, trying to unmute. We kind of do the same as our Cord situation, with that difference that we use on the on-prem site. We push on a first VLAN tag with our programmable NIC, or whatever you want to call it, the intelligent the SFP we used from Microsemi, and then there's an additional VLAN tag pushed on the edge, the Ethernet edge, which is the entry point into the Cord side, which I guess doubles the OLT role in our Cord. So in that sense, we're very much aligned with our Cord and I guess Cord platform. Okay, so I think it would be helpful, and I'll take the lead and get this going, just to get this down in words and pictures for everyone to understand where the access-specific pieces are and the platform-specific boundaries are, so we can define those interfaces. It sounds like this is doable, and then we can, once we get it down on paper, we can decide if we want to do something more aggressive in pushing the platform boundary out closer to the edge. On the other side, we speak in terms, and now I'm kind of thinking of the conversation David Bainbridge has started up on VTN. We have some fairly general purpose support in VTN that maybe we need to revisit, but it's been attempting pretty general support for service chaining, service composition. But the fact of the matter is that in an access network, once you hit you're now internet routable,
I'm wondering how general purpose in practice we need to be there. And so going back to the RCord case, if you leave a VSG container with an IP address, is this really all about having a WAN network that you perhaps subnet on the internet side, and that in practice is general enough, or is that overly restrictive?
And I almost think there's two interesting issues here that are somewhat overlapped. There's the tenant networking, which is absolutely, I think, integral to Cord, but there's also the chaining. And I think Cord has kind of mixed them together. And I'm not sure they always should be mixed together, because there's also another virtualization or virtual tenant networking technology going into ONOS, which is the VNet technology based on OVX. And because we've merged these together, it's not where someone can say, look, I want this tenant virtualization technology and this chaining technology. And I don't know how that's got to work its way through Cord as well.
Yeah, you're right that we have blended those somehow, or conflated them. But so one question is, how general purpose does the chaining side of that need to be? Maybe one way of asking this is, if you have tenant networking, do you need chaining in the way most people talk about it?
I'm not sure I can answer that, because I'm not sure I talk about it the way most people talk about it, right? I may be completely off base the way I talk about it. But the way I see it is, you absolutely need chaining. They serve two different purposes. Virtual tenant networking is basically saying, as a tenant or a group of tenants, I give access to some common services. They have a private network to play on, if you will. Versus chaining says, when a packet comes from this subscriber, this tenant, I'm going to do certain processing on it before it essentially meets in that common network area. And I'm going to do processing on it as it goes back to that subscriber. And that is where I see the chaining happening.
So would you say that chaining then is you're transparently the bump in the wire, where the tenant network is you're explicitly addressed, and you get to respond or pass the packet on as you see fit?
Yeah, that's kind of how I've been looking at it. And again, I'm not saying I'm the oracle of chaining here, so I could be completely off. But that's how I've been kind of envisioning it.
Yeah, I think that's consistent with the way that I've looked at it too. But I'm not. It's easily confused.
So I think that's a conversation we need to have around Cord to understand what the needs are, the various different flavors of Cord, and where can a platform support be built to meet that. I think that conversation needs to happen. And I think that's also where it becomes interesting to say, do we need to take these concepts that we've blended today and separate them a little bit more, so that we have tenant networking, or kind of that, whether it's overlay or underlay tenant networking, as a separate concept from how we deal with chaining.
Yeah.
And then there's going to be some integration required still, so it may not be able to be completely separated, but I think we need to work on that. I think we also have to focus on where we've blended kind of the hardware configuration part of that as well. So today, the VTN app, for instance, has SSH capabilities to the compute nodes to create the bridges, which it then controls. Do we need to separate kind of, how do I set those bridges up from the control of those bridges, so that we have a little bit, another dial there that we can play with? So say, look, here's how the bridge is set up, and that may be separate from controlling those bridges, such that there is a tenant network capability. And I'm wondering if we need to work on that as well.
Good point. So I think that in terms of the blending issue, we're asking it's blended in the sense that we're asking VTN to do it for us. But I think it is in fact the case that the attributes that we put on the quote unquote virtual network that we're asking VTN to implement are completely decoupled, in terms of, if you were asking for this unidirectional thing, it turned out that you were really trying to do chaining, and you were doing transparent bump in the wire. And if you wanted the bidirectional, you were really doing, I'm on the same net, can I send you a request message?
Yeah, and that's why I've been kind of digging into VTN. It's VTN may solve these issues. I did not and still do not have the complete understanding of how they address them, and that's kind of why that conversation on the list has been happening.
Yeah.
Is I've been trying to dig in to understand it, and I've been playing with my own kind of experiment in terms of Docker containers and OVS to understand how I think of chaining and how VTN addresses that.
Okay, so we've got this is great because these have been these issues have been troubling me, and I think they're bubbling to the surface for other people as well. So no resolution. I think it would be good to put together kind of a this is well off of the immediate roadmap perhaps, which I know is coming together and so on, but a little bit more long-term thinking about where we want to take VTN, and we want to take both the access side and the WAN side and chaining. So I'm going to put together a little outline of a document without much content and see if we can just make it available for people to try to help summarize their understandings as we dig deeper. Which actually now reminds me of the other issue that we were going to get to a little bit here in the TST call, which is release planning. Somewhat more immediate than what we've been talking about. Yuan, you want to speak to that?
Oh, I think we had planned on release planning being May 2nd, with the TST being extended to 2 hours to support that. And then here's a link to a slide set. So I think the intent we want is for each of the Cord variants to provide an updated roadmap and dependencies on the platform. So I think the only thing that I want to note is it seems like this Cord planning is very focused around the Cord platform. So I don't know how we're doing the planning for the various Cord variants.
So that's a great question, and just to reiterate that the planning document as an overview slide for the platform and A-Cord and M-Cord and E-Cord and so on, but it tends to drill down only on the platform side, and the bottom line from all the other variants of Cord is what do they require from the platform. So that's clearly a bullet we need to have. We need people to understand how each group constructs its own internal roadmap, which we hope they share more globally, is not well defined. And in fact, we've just been struggling with exactly how that's going to happen for A-Cord and Volta. M-Cord seems to be reasonably on top of it, as does E-Cord. So I don't know if anyone has opinions about, well, I know Mark and Oz are on, how M-Cord and E-Cord's planning. It's a pretty much an independent, orthogonal, parallel thing, of which the connection point is what do you require from the platform, and maybe that's enough to know.
Okay, Larry, I'll defer this question a little bit longer. I don't have a real answer right now.
For the case of M-Cord, you're absolutely right. I mean, the mobile 3GPP network is pretty much an overlay network. So, but the previous talk that we had on VTNs becomes relevant here as well, especially in the case of network slicing. So, but up until now, we have managed to get all we need from the Cord platform as far as M-Cord is concerned. So there's no immediate non-existent requirement that we ask from the next release right now.
So, and it is also the case that you have your own processes by which you come up with your roadmap.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a release planning process on the MCORD side?
That is the MCORD side.
Where all the that's what I meant. Where all the vendors are getting together and planning what would be done in the next release.
Yes, so we are starting, it's good that you bring that up. We are starting regular MCORD meetings again. The first one is going to take place this Thursday at 9 a.m. Those of you who have not received an invitation from me, I apologize. I may have not included you in the mailing list that I just created. But it is going to be in the big meeting room, 9 a.m. And from that point onwards, it's a bi-weekly meeting. And the first meeting is focused on our roadmap.
So is it possible to get that on the Cord calendar?
Yeah, please do that.
Yes, gladly.
All right, so the individual projects will have their own roadmaps. We will use this TST meeting and like we just did and related documents and so on to make sure we understand where the touch points are and the requirements for the platform. The release planning meeting that's scheduled for, what is it now, 2 weeks from today during the TST call, May 2nd, is primarily a platform-focused discussion. But hopefully that's of interest to everybody, and it's an opportunity to make sure, well, A, you're mostly vested in the platform, but B, if you're a variant of Cord, then that's your chance to make sure you know what's going on and you get your priorities on the queue.
I think the other ask we had from one of the previous meetings was, what was it going to take for eCord and MCORD to integrate with Cord? Right, so in some future TST session, we wanted kind of that overview.
Well, let's visit that for just 1 second, and again, I'm going to put Mark on the spot. There was, and Andre, if he's there, that there was this, after ONS is over, eCord would be able to take a look at Dangerous Edition and see how much work was involved to maybe not make the exact date of the release, but not very much afterwards. Is any progress happened there?
So Andrea is really the right guy with all the details. So I do know we have this document that lists all the changes that affected us, and the list is quite long. So at this point, I don't have an exact delivery date, but there's quite a few things that need to be taken care of before we can, release or merge or whatever you want to call it.
So let me ask, and maybe the answer is no one knows yet, but I see, like, for example, Scott and Sapan who are deep in some of the changes to the models and so on. Have you had a chance, either of you, to look at eCord or work with those folks to understand how difficult that's going to be?
Yeah, so eCord, they sent me a patch for synchronizers. I think it was eCord who did this. And the changes looked good, but there's always additional grief that comes about when you actually go to test them under the refactored architecture. So there'll probably be a little bit of iteration on the synchronizers, something that slipped by, but I don't think there's major work there from what I've seen.
Okay, thanks. So is there a way we can use this TST meeting more effectively on this particular topic of how the various flavors and the platform overlap? We kind of touch on it from time to time, but we don't do it in a very systematic way. And maybe that's fine, but does anyone have any way they'd like to see this done? I mean, in some sense, the work gets done at release planning time and then at release time when we're under the gun to make sure everything is connected, and maybe that's fine.
I think it's just harder for us to kind of scope and say what's really in or out. So as we talk about dependencies, it'll be hard without some of the upfront information to say it's not realistic, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the focus for the platform is going to be on trying to do some cleanup and enable, developers. So that's still being worked out. Right.
So just for FYI, for those that haven't been involved in the discussion, if there were a theme for the platform for shared delusion, it will be make the platform easier for developers to use, and that involves taking the refactoring work that's happened for Dangerous Edition and finishing the job, basically, that things are, we think, set up to do significant improvement, but it'll be dominated by cleanup and finishing the job as opposed to taking on new features, just as a general rule. So, that's just the way it may be, which is that there will be a lag then, and Bill has made this point many times. The various flavors know what's on the docket for the platform, and then they adapt their roadmap accordingly. And we can't expect them to know ahead of time how they're going to need us to change things that we haven't even done yet.
But I guess the decision is, are the flavors releasing independently of Cord?
They're releasing,
right? Or
I think they have to release independently. In this particular case, pragmatically, it sounds like that's already.
I thought we already discussed this a couple of weeks ago. I mean, it's normal that a platform makes changes, especially in its early days. So it's impossible for us to stay in lockstep. And original planning gave us 2 weeks, 3 weeks to sync up with all the changes. If we want to do it either way, I mean, we have to be very clear about it. But I thought we decided on this already. So
yeah, I think we did.
And I think it makes sense. This way you can decide on which Cord version you want to use, right?
What platform version you want to use. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's typical to any operating system, right? Our platform, it may run ahead of the applications or services that run on top of it. As well, those services drive the roadmap for that platform as well, but it's not lockstep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the key is that the platform has kind of these well-defined interfaces. So even as a platform evolves separately from the various different flavors, and again, this is common knowledge really, that you have that standard interface, so they can evolve separately. If the platform even now is evolving that API too rapidly, there's just no way to keep all this in sync.
Right. Well, so just to tie together two seemingly unrelated topics here, what we were talking about before with the VLANs and the tags is related, because when we think of interfaces, one of the interfaces is what does the Cord platform expect packets to look like when they hit the platform? How many tags do they have on them? Is the tagging inside the platform or outside? So what is, another way of saying that is, what is VSG's data plane interface? And both on incoming packets and outgoing packets. And what's vRouter's data plane interface? If you wanted to be eCord and reuse vRouter, then what assumptions were you making about how packets were tagged or not tagged as they left the virtual enterprise gateway? Those are other interfaces that we really have not documented down in the data plane. Okay, so platform release planning, 2 weeks from today, an extra long TST meeting. A-Cord, Volta, M-Cord, E-Cord independently working on roadmaps letting the platform know what they need, and perhaps getting into a state of more regular meetings. We're certainly trying to do that with Cord. Any other big?
So right now, is VOTA having that regular meeting?
Not yet.
It is not yet.
We should.
But yeah, but that's something that I talked to Saurav about, and I think that would help us stay on track to, evolve VOTA, as I was speaking to earlier.
So absolutely, yes, that is what we want to do. It's just a matter of finding someone that will just take ownership and getting that meeting set up and running it.
Hi, this is Shishi.
This
is Shishi. So I talked to Saurav last week. So he is not here this week. So he told me he will start the meeting starting from next week. And the new person also started. We will discuss all those options in great detail and then decide the next step.
Yep.
Yeah. That's my understanding as well.
Okay, if you need any help, let me know.
Sure.
This is Sean from AT&T.
All right, so I will make sure that we have a kind of clearinghouse operation here, that everyone is aware of when the meetings are, what the mailing lists are, and so on. And again, when these meetings get scheduled, let's get them on the Cord calendar.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your.
One more thing.
Oh, yep.
So for the platform, there's a survey that's going around, right? The team is trying to address pain points from a development standpoint. So Mateo sent out a survey to try to understand what the pain points are so that we can start brainstorming and figuring what we can do to make the development experience better. So we're asking that the folks in the various Cord variants that have been working with Cord fill out the survey.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.